The Austrian painter Egon Schiele is famous for the disturbed intensity, twisted bodies and raw sexuality he depicted in his paintings, many of which are self-portraits. A major figurative painter, he created over 3,000 works on paper and around 300 paintings. These are often considered shocking and offensive for their explicit, unapologetic eroticism. His portraits and self-portraits are searing depictions of his subjects, and are among the most remarkable of the 20th century. His use of sharply drawn angular lines, and combination of color, show him to be an early champion of Austrian expressionism, which rejected typical conventions of beauty, and introduced ugliness, and exaggerated emotion into art. Schiele was born in 1890 in Tulln, a small town 40 kilometers from Vienna. His father was the railway station master, and the world of railroads and steam shaped Schiele's early childhood. As an upper-level civil servant, his father was given an apartment above the station, and had an income sufficient for their needs. Schiele had 2 older sisters. He also had a younger one, Gertrude, born 4 years after his own birth. Gertie would become Egon's confidant, and first female model, and the first nude he painted. From early childhood, it was clear that Schiele had a talent for drawing. He could always be seen with his sketchbook, filled mostly with drawings of trains and the station. He became so absorbed in his sketching, that his father, frustrated that his son wasn't interested in becoming a railway engineer, ended up destroying his sketchbooks, supposedly to get him to focus on his studies. In 1900, at the age of 10, Schiele began attending high school at a nearby town. He was forced to board there, and being lonely, did poorly in school. By 1902, his failing grades convinced his father to move him to the school in nearby Klosterneuburg. Schiele later dropped out of high school and finished the year with a private tutor at home with his family. In 1904, Schiele's father's health deteriorated badly. Soon, he was unable to carry out his duties. He was officially removed from his post in Tulln, and the family decides to join their son Egon in Klosterneuburg. On January 1, 1905, Adolf Schiele died, aged 54, from syphilis-induced progressive paralysis. His death was a great loss to his 15-year-old son. The father's illness had created an economic crisis for his family. Several years of increasing madness and the loss of all his savings before his death forced his wife to turn to wealthier family members for assistance. In particular to her brother-in-law, Leopold, who became co-guardian of the 2 younger children, Egon and his sister, Gertrude. As Schiele's academic performance remained poor, his teachers suggested artistic training. Luckily, Schiele's uncle recognized Egon's drawing skills and, begrudgingly, agreed to let him pursue his artistic talents. In 1906, Schiele applied to study at Vienna's School of Arts and Crafts, but during his first year his teachers decided he was better suited to the more traditional Academy of Fine Arts. He applied, and gained a place in what was then the most exclusive art school in the monarchy. He was one of the youngest pupils ever to be trained there. He subsequently moved to Vienna with his mother and sisters to begin his training. The traditional program at the academy consisted of life drawing, and copying classical sculptures. Schiele's teacher favored technical skills, and had little interest in individuality, or originality. Needless to say, Schiele and he did not get on well. The teacher forced Egon through the traditional lessons in art technique, in which Egon drew ancient statues, living models, and other academic pieces. Although these pieces give little evidence of Schiele's real talent, they helped him to perfect his gift as a draftsman. He was forced to find the perfect line for his drawings. He earned only passing grades in almost all his subjects, but his work at the academy had little lasting influence on his personal style. Always looking for something new, Schiele found himself drawn to the works of artist Gustav Klimt, who promoted artistic modernization through the Vienna Secession. The secessionists demanded an uncensored creative atmosphere, in which contemporary art and ideas could thrive. Klimt painted mysterious, flamboyant women, which scandalized Viennese society. To Schiele, he was a hero. In 1907, Klimt became Schiele's mentor, and the two developed a close friendship. Klimt took a particular interest in young Schiele, buying his paintings, arranging models for him and introducing him to potential patrons. Klimt was an important influence on Schiele, helping him to move away from the conventionality of his academic training. Klimt, however, didn't simply fashion Schiele in his own image. He introduced him to the work of free-thinking artists like Edvard Munch and Vincent van Gogh. Klimt's influence began to appear in the younger artist's work around 1907, with colors and shapes typical of Art Nouveau entering into his work. This influence became even stronger in 1908, presumably after a large exhibition, which included a roomful of Klimt's paintings. Some of Schiele's later works show close similarities to Klimt's ideas. For instance, in this painting, the pose of Schiele's Cardinal and Nun, painted in 1912, which mirrors Klimt's iconic The Kiss, painted in 1907. Cardinal and Nun is a tongue-in-cheek play by Schiele, and a slightly sacrilegious homage to Klimt. Rather than love and passion, these religious figures are caught in the act, definitely against their religious vows. Here, Schiele replaced Klimt's gilded harmony with a suspense-packed convergence of polar opposites, supported by the contrasting colors of the scandalous red and deep black. During his late adolescence, Schiele had an intense relationship with his younger sister, Gertie, which was not without its incestuous implications. When he was 16 and she was 12, he used the free ticket of the state railways that the two semi-orphans were entitled to travel by train to Trieste, where they spent the night in a double room at a hotel together. He used his time there to create several studies of the harbor. In May 1908, Schiele participated for the first time in an exhibition in the town where he was living. He entered 10 oil paintings, one of which is shown here. It is a row of houses lining the town hall square in Klosterneuburg. Schiele's work caught the attention of the superintendent of the Austrian Southern Railway. Though not a wealthy man, he became one of the most important collectors of Schiele's works on paper, forming today's Schiele collection at the Vienna Albertina Museum. Nearly half of Schiele's oil paintings were produced prior to 1909, and the majority of those works were landscapes, mainly small works on cardboard. These paintings give little indication of his future development. Schiele's approach to landscape took a distinctive turn following a trip, in 1910, to Krumau, his mother's birthplace. Schiele called Krumau the Dead City, because the town's ancient walls remind him of the persistence of human creation, in the face of decay. Schiele's first painting of the Dead City was rendered on paper, but at the suggestion of one of his patrons, he began executing similar works on small boards. In defiance of the Academy's rigid conventions, Schiele began to explore new modes of expression, favoring distortions and jagged contours of form, and a more somber palette than the ornate style popularized by his mentor, Klimt. In 1910, Schiele painted his sister Gertie, when she was still a teenager. Her figure here is reminiscent of Klimt's work, but the image is static and soft. Schiele replaced Klimt's richly shimmering, gold-dominated palette with more muted colors, creating an image that appears more like a clay sculpture. Aesthetically and technically, his paintings during this period were more like large watercolors than conventional oils. Drawing played an important structural role in defining principal contours, and the figures were filled in with thin washes. The incorporation of plaster or chalk in his grounds created an unusually porous surface. Frequently depicting himself, or those close to him, Schiele's portraits often present their sitters in the nude, posed in revealing, unsettling angles, frequently viewed from above, and devoid of attributes often depicted in the portrait genre. Schiele was first and foremost an exceptionally talented draftsman. Even in his paintings, his primary emphasis remained the structural element of the composition. He communicated moods through vivid, surprising colors, such as blue, red, or green, as well as deep browns and blacks. The figures themselves become a part of the ornamental abstraction. They are angular bodies, lacking the organic rounded plasticity of Klimt's figures. In Schiele's work, any decorative function is essentially banished from the picture, which is in stark contrast to the works of Gustav Klimt, as you can see here. By 1909, 19-year-old Schiele was strutting about Vienna calling himself the Silver Klimt, and, in flagrant defiance of Academy regulations, had accepted invitations to submit paintings to an exhibition in Prague, and also to exhibit at a commercial art gallery in Vienna. Finally, after becoming frustrated with the Academy's strict rules and conservative style, he decided to drop out before finishing his studies. He and a group of dissatisfied students delivered a formal letter of protest to the Academy, declaring their opposition to the school's rigid rules and orthodox methods. They then formed their own association, the New Art Group, and held numerous exhibitions together. Schiele served as the group's president and secretary. Within a year, however, rivalry within the group prompted Schiele to resign. At the same time, Schiele's guardian, Leopold, became upset when Schiele quit the Academy. He also objected strongly to his nephew's ongoing requests for money. Leopold finally renounced his guardianship, as well as all financial support for Schiele. He suggested that Schiele join the army. After leaving the Academy, and now responsible for his own upkeep, Schiele found a flat and a studio and set up on his own. At this time, he showed a strong interest in drawing pubescent children, especially young girls. His studio became a meeting place, and a place of refuge, for children from all over Vienna. Already a superb draftsman, Schiele made many drawings from these willing models, some of which were extremely erotic. While Schiele's work scandalized many who viewed them, at the same time he sold large numbers of his explicit images to private collectors. He seems to have made part of his income by supplying drawings to collectors of pornography, who abounded in Vienna. At the time, he wrote, "doing an awful lot of advertising with my prohibited drawings." During this period, and indeed afterwards, Schiele liked to give an impression of his extreme poverty. But his claims that he was virtually in rags are at odds with what his contemporaries had to say, and with the photographs taken of him at the time. His letters make it plain that he suffered from a degree of persecution mania. For example, he wrote in a letter of 1910, "How hideous it is here! Everyone envies me and conspires against me. Former colleagues regard me with malevolent eyes." Almost abruptly, after leaving the Academy, Schiele dropped the design patterns of Art Nouveau, and concentrated on making the body and bodily gestures the subject of his works. This shift is evident when you compare Klimt's painting, Judith II, seen here, with Schiele's Standing Girl in Plaid, both painted in 1909. Beguiling beauty, and tragic ugliness, sharp-edged lines, and a flat coloring, combine in this tense, yet fragile figure. By 1910, Schiele had begun experimenting with painting nudes, and within a year a strong new style, featuring emaciated, sickly-colored figures, often with strong sexual overtones, developed. Schiele's self-portrait, kneeling nude with raised hands, is considered to be among the most significant nude art pieces of the 20th century. No longer following a strictly academic style, he created an uproar at the time with his contorted lines and heavy display of figurative expression. His radical approach challenged both scholars and progressives alike. Many found the explicitness of his works disturbing, something that continues, even today. Schiele stated his philosophy quite clearly. The artist must, at all costs, be himself. He must be a creator. He must build the foundation of his new art himself, without reference to tradition, or the past. Schiele was now well on the way to establishing himself professionally. Not yet 20 years old, he had already developed his own distinctive expressionist style and was amassing an impressive group of supporters, including a small group of well-to-do private collectors. In a letter to a friend, written in 1910, he revealed his confidence in his future prospects, and also his tendency to narcissism. "I shall go so far," he said, "that people will be seized with terror at the sight of each of my works of living art. A single living work of art will suffice to make an artist immortal. My pictures must be placed in buildings like temples." In 1910, Schiele met Arthur Rosula, who supported the artist as a collector and a business manager. So seemingly warm was Schiele's welcome into the avant-garde Viennese art establishment at this time, that he began to view his departure from the academy as a smart career move. But appearances proved deceptive. Schiele had already acquired his artistic independence, but as yet, not full public recognition. In February 1910, the second exhibition of the New Art Group was held at the Club of German Women Artists in Prague. In May, at the invitation of the head of the Vienna workshops, Schiele participated in the first international hunting exhibition, held at the rotunda of the Vienna Prater. Schiele exhibited a now lost, life-sized seated female nude. It is said that when Emperor Franz Joseph saw the work, he turned away from it saying, "But this is awful." After 1910, Schiele's production of portraits dropped sharply. He had a problem. He was not inclined to be in the least bit accommodating, either professionally or personally, with his clients. His decorative commissions were considered either too abrasive or too sexually explicit for his audience. And his portraits were frontal assaults on a sitter's vanity. His extreme behavior eventually exasperated his patrons, who were not prepared to put up with him. Schiele responded to these dashed hopes by turning inwardly and eventually fleeing Vienna. Toward the end of 1910, he began a series of murky allegories, exploring his role as artistic visionary. This picture was to be part of a series comprising such subjects as the birth of genius, the unwed mother, and the stepmother. Of these, only the first was painted, though the artist continued to explore the theme of motherhood in 1911 and thereafter. Schiele yearned to create the sort of grand allegorical murals that Klimt had once painted, but there was no public outlet for such works, and private clients rarely bought them. Unlike Klimt's society portraits, Schiele's works were unflattering, and few patrons were eager for sittings. Thus, a huge void developed between Schiele's artistic desire and his realistic prospects, a gap that was to haunt his entire brief career. Schiele's self-portraits are extraordinary, not only for the frequency with which the artist depicted himself, but for the manner in which he did so. Eroticized depictions, where he often appears in the nude, in highly revealing poses. These are male self-portraits virtually unparalleled in the history of Western art. The self-portraits, like this one, produced between 1910 and 1918 are searing, psychologically complex images. The emaciated, tortured figure of the artist, bony and angular, bristles with an inner tension, made visible by the agitated pencil line and painted white surrounding aura. His 100 self-portraits suggest narcissism, and point to his extraordinary fascination with himself. Yet, the awkwardness of the postures, and a certain neurotic theatricality, challenge that view. In this drawing, the artist has created an intense and almost frightening vision of himself, emaciated, with glowing red eyes, legs deformed and footless, his body fully exposed, yet with his face partially hidden, perhaps suggesting a sense of shame. He expresses his anxiety through line and contour, and in flesh that appears abraded and subjected to harsh elements, a theme that was characteristic of the expressionist style that he was practicing at this time. In 1911, he began work on a group of allegorical self-portraits that may collectively be referred to as the Self-Seers series. Schiele liked to play with the double meanings of sight and vision, referring both to his literal ability to see and his spiritual insight. As an artist, he felt it was his duty to hone each of these faculties, so that he could deliver messages from beyond the visible world. Prophets is a similarly allegorical portrayal. The prophet, often depicted in Christian iconography as an entranced and angelic figure, becomes in Schiele's image a projection of the artist's own internal torment. Defined as an inspired teacher or visionary and clairvoyant, the prophet enables Schiele to construct an image of the artist as a mystical soothsayer. In 1911, 21-year-old Schiele met 17-year-old Walburga Nusel, nicknamed Wally. She lived with him in Vienna, and served as a model for some of his most striking paintings. Very little is known of her, except that she had previously modeled for Gustav Klimt, and might have been one of his mistresses. While she was Schiele's most important model at the time, she was never his only one. She did not pose for free, but receives payment for the sittings, like all of his other professional models. She lived with and supported him in his everyday business affairs. She managed all of Schiele's finances, and his dealing with his clients, art collectors, and gallery owners. Acting as his agent, she delivered his erotic drawings to the people who commissioned them. She made rent payments, and was both his manager, housekeeper and lover. Schiele made no secret of his relationship with her, with either his patrons and collectors, or his family. Schiele's method of drawing, based on direct observation of the subject, was executed without the artist taking his eyes off the model. The contours were drawn with quick strokes of a pencil or pen, and the flesh tones filled in with watercolor. This method produced a lively freshness, adding to the magnetic lure of his sitters, some scantily clad, while others were completely nude. Schiele's drawings of women were scandalous enough, but his risky habit of depicting children was to prove ruinous. In 1911, Schiele became tired of what he called the claustrophobic, Viennese environment, and decided to move to the small town of Krumau in southern Bohemia, which was the birthplace of his mother. At first, the artist was deliriously happy in his new home, taking the townspeople's bemused looks as a sign of adulation. But the provincial villagers were not impressed with Schiele's bizarre manner of dressing, or his unconventional lifestyle. They objected to his alleged employment of the town's teenage girls as models, and the couple living together without being married. In August 1911, after a nude model was observed posing outdoors, he and Wally were evicted from their lodgings and forced to leave town. Following a short stay at his mother's home in Vienna, Schiele, who was seeking inspirational surroundings and an inexpensive studio in which to work, moved to Neu-Lengbach, a small rural community 35 kilometers west of Vienna. Schiele's studio soon became a gathering place for many of the town's children. The townspeople, who were staunchly Catholic, were appalled. In April 1912, Schiele was arrested and jailed on the charges of kidnapping, statutory rape, and public immorality with a local 14-year-old model. When the police came to his studio to arrest Schiele, they seized more than 100 drawings, which they considered to be pornographic. When he appeared in court, the charges of abduction and seduction were dropped as the incident had a perfectly innocent explanation. A teenage runaway had asked the couple to take her to her grandmother in Vienna. Once in the city, the girl got cold feet, and the three returned to Neu-Lengbach a day later. By then, the teenager's father had filed charges, which led the police to conduct a thorough investigation of the artist. Although innocent of the first charge, Schiele was found guilty of exhibiting erotic drawings in a place accessible to children. He was sentenced to 24 days in jail, 21 of which had already been served, awaiting trial. While he was in prison, Schiele produced a series of self-portraits, inscribed with self-pitying phrases. "I do not feel punished, rather purified," he said. "To restrict the artist is a crime." Following his release from prison in May, Schiele returned to Vienna. In October he found an appropriate studio in Vienna's 13th district, which he used for the rest of his life. Schiele had the walls painted white, while all his furniture was in varying shades of black. In the summer of 1912, he embarked on several trips, visiting his favorite places of the past, including Trieste, where he sketched boats in the harbor. In August, he traveled to Munich with Wally to see works by the German Expressionists. Later in the year, after seeing that Schiele was experiencing financial difficulties, Gustav Klimt introduced Schiele to the eminent art collector and industrialist August Lederer. He and his wife were among the most important collectors of Klimt's works, and their son Erich became Schiele's student and friend. Schiele spent Christmas and New Year at the family's estate in Hungary. He painted this portrait of Erich at the time. After his prison experience, Schiele stopped using children as models, although he still painted them, usually accompanied by a mother figure. The morbidity and sexual explicitness in his other works did not decrease, particularly in his drawings. His prison term had no effect on his career, and apparently, little on his character, apart from supplying him with tangible proof that he was indeed a victim. From then on, Schiele's allegorical ambitions became even grander. As though to teach the world a lesson, and to affirm the sanctity of his artistic mission, he began planning a pair of large allegorical murals, Conversion and Encounter. In both, the artist himself was to serve as the spirit guide, followed by a group of blind acolytes. Unfortunately, Schiele proved incapable of mastering either composition, and he ended up abandoning both canvases. In his allegorical self-portraits, Schiele was often accompanied by a second figure, appearing variously as an eerie double, a puppet master, a bestower of enlightenment or death. In one of his most famous paintings, The Hermits, painted in 1912, Schiele appears alongside his spiritual mentor, Gustav Klimt, standing together, nearly as one. As close as the two men were, Schiele spent much of his career trying to break free of Klimt's influence on his work. In the picture, both men wear their signature long black kaftans, an item of clothing for which Klimt was known, and which Schiele appropriated for his own work, perhaps in tribute. Never one for modesty, Schiele positions Klimt in the background, blind, and mostly hidden, as if being consumed by the younger artist. The resulting form evokes the image of a single dark figure, indicating the confident successor Schiele, assuming the mantle of the old master. One of Schiele's many eerie self-depictions at the time, Self-Portrait with Lowered Head, is striking for its accentuation of the hands and the omitted thumb. Thumbs seem not to fit into Schiele's visual vocabulary, he often omitted them or rendered them at severe angles. Schiele's head is bent, the eyes turned upwards, his lips sporting a small moustache, which he only had for a short time towards the end of 1911. In 1911, when Schiele was 21, he had his first solo exhibition, at a prominent Viennese gallery where the artist's increasing obsession with portraiture was on full display. This is perhaps Schiele's most celebrated self-portrait, and certainly the most talked about. In this work, Schiele gazes directly at the viewer, his expression suggesting a confidence in his artistic gifts. Although Schiele deploys less distortion than in other self-portraits, the painting refuses to idealize its subject, featuring scars and other lines characteristic of the contoured manner of the artist's drawing style. The Chinese lantern painting was exhibited in Munich at the Gallery Hans Goltz in 1912, alongside work by members of the Blue Rider group of Expressionist, which included Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc. The Goltz show provided Schiele with his greatest exposure to date, revealing his rich use of personal symbolism and dark allegory to the public. Schiele's relationship with Goltz was a constant struggle over money, Schiele always wanting the highest possible prices for his work. Later that year, Schiele participated in a two-person show at the prestigious Ossos Museum in Hagen, Germany. During the exhibition, the museum bought Schiele's painting, Dead City 6, for their collection. It was the first acquisition of a Schiele work by a museum. In January 1913, Schiele was admitted to the Association of Austrian Artists, presided over by Gustav Klimt, which was a great honor. At the time, he wrote boastfully to his mother, "All beautiful and noble qualities have been united in me. I shall be the fruit which will leave eternal vitality behind, even after its decay. How great must be your joy, therefore, to have given birth to me." Later in the year, he participated in exhibitions in Budapest, Munich, Düsseldorf, Dresden, and Berlin. As a result, the Munich Gallery Goltz held a major solo exhibition of his work. Unfortunately, the show was not a success, and Schiele lost the support of this influential German dealer. Combined with debts incurred from Schiele's arrest and imprisonment in 1912, this economic blow meant that the artist was barely scraping by financially. Hoping to solve his money worries, Schiele temporarily took up printmaking in February 1914. Thanks to an improvement in his finances later that year, he was soon able to return to drawing and painting, which he preferred. During 1913, he also took part in exhibitions outside of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany. His works appeared in Rome, Brussels, and Paris. At the time, he completed this work, Young Mother. In December 1914, Schiele had his second one-man show in Vienna, at the gallery of Guido Arno. Schiele's narcissism, exhibitionism and persecution mania can all be found united in the poster he produced for the exhibition, in which he portrayed himself as the Christian martyr, Saint Sebastian. In 1914, Schiele met the sisters Edith and Adele Harms, who lived with their parents across the street from his studio in Vienna. They were a middle-class Protestant family and their father was a master locksmith. Schiele was attracted to both of the sisters, but eventually fixed his sights on Edith, who he felt had a better social standing than his present mistress Wally. Rumor had it that she had worked as a prostitute before he met her. In February 1915, Schiele wrote a note to his friend Arthur Rosula stating, "I intend to get married, advantageously, but not to Wally." Schiele's last meeting with Wally took place at their local cafe. He handed her a letter in which he proposed that despite their parting, they take a holiday together every summer, without Edith. Not surprisingly, Wally refused, and moved out. She never saw him again. Despite some opposition from the Harms family, Schiele and Edith were married in June 1915. Schiele's mother was not present at the wedding. Death and the Maiden was painted around the time Schiele separated from his mistress, and several months before he married his fiancée, Edith Harms. The painting memorializes the end of his affair, seemingly conveying this separation as the death of true love. In this painting, one of Schiele's most complex and haunting works, the female figure, gaunt and tattered, clings to the male figure, while surrounded by an equally tattered landscape. The male figure is a self-portrait depicting death. Schiele's grey face and black eyes hauntingly look out at us. Wally is depicted as very much alive, and her pink dress brings a splash of color to the piece. Schiele, like Klimt, loved women, however his primary subject and greatest interest was himself. He was a narcissist, and obsessed with his own visceral experience of life. In December 1915, Schiele was able to exhibit at the Berlin Secession. His work Levitation was hung opposite Gustav Klimt's picture, Death and Life. Schiele's focus here is the interface between life and death, although he never tells us what the hereafter might have in store. The work's theme is humans letting go of life on Earth. It mercilessly lays bare the ephemeral nature of all that is human, while posing the question, what lies beyond? The picture's alternative name is The Blind Two. Schiele used blindness as a metaphor for those unable to see the deeper truths underlying mortal existence. However, in this picture it is Schiele himself who appears to have been blinded. The painting is in some ways a mate to Death and the Maiden. Created on the eve of Schiele's marriage, both paintings demonstrate a newfound sense of vulnerability in the artist. Edith evidently had a maturing effect on Schiele's work, as seen in pieces like Embrace and Death and the Maiden, which suggest the artist now had a deeper understanding of, and appreciation for narrative and traditional portraiture. Even though its two nude figures are entwined, there's no eroticism in this piece. It is a tender union, where the couple seek comfort, rather than sex. Though the embrace may not be an aesthetic beauty, it is an icon of tenderness. After 1915, Schiele's female nudes became fuller in figure, but many were deliberately illustrated with a lifeless doll-like appearance. Depicted singly, the button-eyed or eyeless female nudes Schiele painted during 1914 and 1915 suggest an effort to depersonalize female sexuality. Yet, like the blind self-portraits, these doll-like figures may symbolize a failed struggle to make human contact. In Two Girls, Lying Entwined, it is the clothed model who appears as the limp and lifeless rag doll, while the nude is fully fleshed out, vibrantly alive. What then did Schiele really want? If the bold sensual Wally was more real than the chaste genteel Edith, was he about to make a mistake? Interestingly, Schiele's portraits of Edith are unlike his portraits of other women. They are sweet, demure and very much clothed, however, they lack the electric charge we see in his other work. This might explain why Schiele soon started to paint Edith's sister, Adele, who later admitted to allowing a spicier relationship with Schiele than she thought was appropriate. Instead of creating a flattering, demure portrait of Adele, as he would have done for Edith, Schiele shows his subject in a controversial, suggestive pose, creating an unfinished feeling through foreshortening, and the use of taut, edgy line work. While illustrative, Schiele's work here does not follow conventional painting styles. When the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was murdered in Sarajevo in June 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The general mobilization of troops began 3 days later. Schiele did not share many of his fellow artists' patriotic enthusiasm for the war. At first exempted from the draft due to a weak heart, he was later declared fit for service. He reported for basic training in Prague 4 days after his wedding. Edith came with him, and stayed in a hotel in the city, while Egon lived in an exhibition hall with his fellow conscripts. The couple were allowed by Schiele's commanding officer to see each other occasionally. Like other Austrian artists, following his basic training, Schiele obtained a series of non-combat assignments. He was sent to Vienna, where he dug trenches, and then he was transferred to a detachment transporting Russian prisoners of war, to and from Vienna. He had little time left for artistic work. He was only able to paint when he had relatively uninterrupted access to his Vienna studio. Sick leave in August 1915 provided one such break, during which he executed a full-sized portrait of his wife Edith, shown here. In May 1916, he was sent to the rural hamlet of Mühling, about 3 hours west of Vienna, to a prisoner of war camp for Russian officers. Since Mühling was not in a war zone, Edith was allowed to accompany him there. Because of his weak heart and his excellent handwriting, Schiele was given a job as a clerk. In his spare time, he was allowed to draw and paint, including imprisoned Russian officers. His commander even gave him a disused storeroom to use as a studio. 1916 was Schiele's least productive year artistically, and his wife, Edith, bored and lonely, seems to have complained constantly. Finally, in January 1917, he was moved to Vienna to work for the Imperial and Royal Commission for the Army in the Field, a depot which supplied food, drink, tobacco and other comforts to the Austrian army. His duties there were relatively light, and the commanding officer gave the artist plenty of creative leeway. In June 1917, Schiele was asked to create a pictorial documentation of military supply depots throughout the empire. He traveled with his immediate superior, Karl Grunewald, to the Tyrol, researching the project. Later, he painted his friend. In early 1917, Schiele, having finished his project, was back in Vienna, full of creative energy and eager to get his painting career moving again. He was a changed man. The experiences of war and marriage had sensitized him to the feelings of others, giving his latest portraits far greater poignancy and emotional objectivity. For some years, he had been groping his way back toward more fully modeled forms, and smoother, less anguished contours. His late drawings betray an almost classical realism that may have been a belated homage to his once despised academic training. Paradoxically, however, as his drawings became more subdued, the painterly abandon of his oils increased. Whereas many of his early paintings had been structured like large drawings, the pigment mimicking watercolor, Schiele had finally learned to appreciate the qualities unique to oil. In their masterful deployment of bold impasto, his last paintings are technically his most typically expressionistic. Around this time, Schiele also began experimenting with the themes of motherhood and family. His wife Edith was the model for most of his female figures, but during the war, many of his sitters were male. In February 1918, Gustav Klimt died. On the following day, Schiele completed 3 drawings of Klimt's corpse at Vienna's General Hospital. Schiele now became the crown jewel of Viennese modernism. The following month, Schiele was invited to participate in the Secession's 49th exhibition, held in Vienna. Schiele had 19 of his oil paintings, and almost 30 drawings, displayed in the main hall. Schiele also designed the poster for the exhibition, which was reminiscent of the Last Supper, with a portrait of himself in the place of Christ. Schiele presides over the table, while the place opposite him was reserved for Gustav Klimt. The exhibition was a breakthrough for Schiele. His section at the Secession show was almost completely sold out, and though inflation ate into his earnings, the artist for the first time saw a prospect of affluence. Among the pieces that sold was The Family, which curiously, Schiele neither signed nor finished. This was not an autobiographical statement, but rather a metaphor for what Schiele called earthly existence. The male figure, a self-portrait representing the life force, punches over the female, who is the vehicle, and the infant, who is the creative outcome. The 3 figures encompass a nested cycle of regeneration and decay. The father figure is the artist, but the woman is not believed to be Edith, though it foreshadowed her pregnancy, with the couple's first child in April 1918. During the exhibition, the Austrian Belvedere Gallery purchased Schiele's portrait of his wife Edith, the first acquisition of a Schiele painting by an Austrian museum. The exhibition was both artistically and financially Schiele's first true success, and as a result, prices for Schiele's drawings increased and he received many portrait commissions. With the proceeds of his sales, Schiele rented a large garden apartment in the city. He retained his old apartment and studio with the thought of opening an art school there. Since Klimt's death that past February, Schiele had been widely acknowledged as Vienna's foremost artist. In April 1918, Schiele was at last assigned to the Army Museum in Vienna, where he organized exhibitions. His first assignment was to organize the 1917 war exhibition in the Prater Park in Vienna. Schiele's continuing army service did not halt the growth of his reputation. He was now thought of as the leading Austrian artist of the younger generation. He was asked to take part in a government-sponsored exhibition in Stockholm and Copenhagen, intended to improve Austria's image with the neutral Scandinavian powers. In April 1918, Edith became pregnant. As the war ground to its inevitable conclusion, food shortages, lack of fuel, and finally, the Spanish influenza pandemic, made life in Vienna precarious. In the autumn of 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic claimed the lives of 20 million people in Europe. Schiele's wife, then in her 6th month of pregnancy, caught the flu. Schiele wrote to his mother saying, "The illness is extremely serious and life-threatening. I am already preparing myself for the worst." Edith died at the end of October. On the evening before, Schiele completed 2 drawings of her. They were to be his final works. Schiele himself had already contracted the flu, and he died 3 days later at the age of 28. He is buried with his wife Edith in Vienna. His last words would come true. "The war is over, and I must go. My paintings will be shown in all the world's museums." Schiele's work consists of around 300 paintings, 17 etchings and lithographs, 2 woodcuts, several sculptures and 2,000 to 3,000 drawings and watercolors. Sadly, a large part of this enormous body of work, which is preserved in various public and private collections around the world, is rarely seen, because of the considerable damage it has suffered over time. To conserve these works, they cannot be exposed to light for too long, and therefore, are kept in storage. Schiele has been labeled the titan of modernism for his work that defied society's values for artists at the time. His paintings turned out to be far too provocative and out of the ordinary for his audience. Schiele introduced unpleasantness at a period when art was supposed to be the purifier of beauty. A shocking move for many. Simply by reimagining what was worth placing on the canvas, Schiele accomplished far more for art than many other artists. In 2018, the 100th anniversary of Egon Schiele's death inspired significant exhibitions of his work in London, Paris, and New York.